Namaskar. Welcome to another episode of India International. This week I want to speak on the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership RCEP, or what is also popularly known as RCEP. On 15th November 2020, that is just last week, 15 countries in the Asia Pacific region signed the RCEP treaty. These 15 countries include 10 countries of ASEAN and 5 other countries, namely Australia, China, Japan, New Zealand and South Korea. RCEP is regarded as, and it is being touted as, one of the biggest regional organizations in the world at present. It comprises of countries which together have a population of 2.2 billion, which is nearly 30% of the entire world population. And also the combined GDP of these 15 countries is almost $26.2 billion, which is also some 30% of the GDP of the world. Negotiations for the RCEP actually began earlier in the year 2012, and initially India also was one of the participants of this group. So primarily RCEP originally was ASEAN plus 6 and the 6th country was India, but eventually in September 2019 New Delhi decided to opt out of this particular regional group. Actually, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, is a very good example of what is usually called the ASEAN driven regional architecture in the Asia Pacific region. This ASEAN driven regional architecture, which comprises of a number of groups, including ASEAN of course, but it includes groupings like the ARF, ASEAN Regional Forum, the East Asia Summit and so on. RCEP is supposed to be a part of it, and this entire architecture emphasizes upon the centrality of ASEAN in the Asia Pacific region. However, as India opted out of it, RCEP is being viewed in a slightly different manner by at least those who oppose India's participation in the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. There is a whole debate since September 2019, that is when India decided to drop out of it, a whole debate on to join or not to join. And believe me, both sides, that is those who favor India joining the RCEP and those who oppose India joining the RCEP, both of them actually have very convincing arguments. Let me look at these arguments one after the other. So first, to talk about those who favor opting out of RCEP and give reasons why India decided to opt out of RCEP as such. The one reason these people emphasize, and probably that is supposed to be one of the most important reasons for New Delhi to decide to drop out of RCEP, is the trade deficits India consistently has with the other 15 countries of this particular groupings. Nearly 12 out of these 15 countries with whom India has a substantial trade deficit. And if we can look at some of the figures of certain countries where we have a very big trade deficit, obviously it is China. In the year 2019 and 20, the trade deficit of India vis-a-vis China is figured at something close to 49%, minus 49%. With the ASEAN group of countries, India's trade deficit is close to 24%. And with countries like South Korea, minus 11%, Japan, minus 8%, and Australia, minus 7%. So, substantial trade deficit, one can say, vis-a-vis all these countries. And that is supposed to be one of the reasons why New Delhi is believed to have opted out of this group. Secondly, there is a fear that the Indian markets will be flooded with imports coming from all these countries, but especially from China. And with a country like China, where we already have a very huge trade deficit, it is believed that after signing the RCEP, the Chinese manufactured goods, which are comparatively much cheaper, could be entering the Indian market, not only directly coming from China, but also via various other, all these 14 member countries, which are the members of the RCEP, the Chinese goods could be entering the Indian markets via any one of these 14 markets. And thus there is a fear of Indian markets being flooded with cheaper goods, especially those which are manufactured in China. One other reason that is given is the fact that, and that is related to the second reason of course, that when cheaper goods flood the Indian markets, obviously the Indian manufacturing sector, the domestic Indian manufacturing sector will be adversely affected. So there are convincing reasons for India not joining the RCEP. Besides, after September 2019, that is when India actually decided to opt out of the RCEP negotiations, the things have changed not in economic terms per se, but in other ways. So what is the change? Firstly, we had this COVID-19 pandemic, and during the COVID-19 pandemic, the overall trend about the international trade, the overall trend has been actually reversed, and we have seen great drops in the figures of overall international trade. Second reason of course is from May 2020, we have seen a lot of Chinese aggressionism along the line of actual control in the Indian Union territory of Ladakh, as a result of which there is growing anti-China sentiment within India. And a third reason is a few months ago, the Indian government declared the policy of what it calls Atmanirbhar Bharat or self-reliant India. So when you speak about self-reliant India or Atmanirbhar Bharat, there is emphasis on domestic manufacturing and domestic market, and thus there is a sentiment against these kind of regional groupings. A few months ago, and since then consistently, India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar has been speaking at various different forums. First he spoke at the Ramnath Goenka lecture, memorial lecture. Then he spoke at the Shangri-La Dialogue. Then he again spoke at the East Asia Summit just a few days before the RCEP treaty was signed. And every time he speaks, he makes a reference to Atmanirbhar Bharat, and he has emphasized, he has underlined several times that Atmanirbhar Bharat is not actually, it doesn't mean going back to the old days, the days of the 1970s. It doesn't mean going back to the days of economic autarky for India. And yet, there is a reason to believe that Atmanirbhar Bharat actually is about protecting domestic producers vis-a-vis the flooding of the Indian markets by imports coming from various different sites. All this has contributed, the three different reasons which I just mentioned, that is COVID pandemic, the policy of Atmanirbhar Bharat, and Chinese aggressionism along the line of actual control. All these reasons have actually contributed to the fuel against the anti-RCEP argument. However, there is an argument within India in favor of joining the RCEP, and you will find it equally convincing. So there are economists also on the other side, and they argue that it is good for India to be joining the RCEP for many reasons. And one of the reasons is the fact that India now is a trading country, and shying away from trade is not a good thing for any country. They point out that since we changed the economic policy in 1991, since we embraced liberalism and subsequently globalization, trade has actually been, and it remains to be, the driver of India's economic growth. And if therefore the trade figures go down, or if we shy away from the trade, that is actually not going to be a good thing for India's growth and India's development overall. Second reason that they point out, and this again has a reference to the first one, this has a reference to trade, what I mean to say. The argument is that no country can ever be expecting to increase its exports and reduce its imports. In fact, the two things go hand in hand. I mean, imports and exports cannot be, in a way, cannot be separated from each other, and therefore, as the argument goes, if a certain country tries to limit or curb its own imports, its exports will also be simultaneously affected. And therefore, they try to argue that there is no much logic behind saying that we are going to curb the imports, and which seems to be the logic behind the anti-RCEP argument. There is a group of economists who also believe that the argument about Indian markets being flooded with cheap manufactured goods is not primarily about imports, but it is more about the structural problems within the Indian economy. So, what they tend to argue, what they tend to say is that if we do not have a robust manufacturing sector domestically, if we do not have a competitiveness in the Indian economy, I mean the ability of the Indian domestic sector to compete with the imports that come in, both in terms of quality and the prices, the problem is a structural problem of the Indian economy, and it is not a problem of trade. And what they also argue is the fact that there is a missing middle. What they mean thereby is that in the Indian economy, the small and medium sector, SMEs as they are called, are conspicuous by their absence or conspicuous by their scarcity, if you want. So, if we reform the economy, if we bring in good policies, if we bring in incentives for creating a robust manufacturing sector within the country, then we really don't have to worry about imports coming from any country for that matter. Looking at it, both these sides and both sides of the argument, let me say, they actually remind me of a period before the signing of the WTO argument. I am talking about a period in the late 1980s or the early 1990s when signing of the WTO treaty was fiercely debated within India. There were people who favored going along with the trend of globalization and signing the treaty. There were people in India who in fact fiercely opposed the signing of the WTO treaty as well. The divide now as the divide at that time looks very similar to me. The economic liberals at that time favored the signing of the WTO argument. The economic liberals today favor the signing of the RCEP argument as well. And today there are protectionists within the country. This group of protectionists, very curiously include the nationalists, the major industry lobbies and groups within the country. These people were against signing the WTO treaty in the 80s and the 90s. This is the similar group of people which is against the signing of the RCEP argument even today. But curiously, the group of protectionist nationalists is also joined by the leftist economists. And again the situation is the same. The leftist economists went against signing the WTO treaty earlier, and the leftist economics are even today opposing the signing of the RCEP argument. So curiously enough, in the group of those who oppose the RCEP, we see the rightists and the leftists sitting together with each other. I, however, propose to look at the RCEP treaty in a somewhat different manner. In last few years, maybe about 5-6 years, maybe since there is a rise of Trump in America, many countries have actually taken a protectionist turn regarding their economic policy. They have become more protectionist. They are now becoming more and more in favor of imposing more tariffs upon the imports and so on. So there is a protectionist turn in the world economy in general in last few years. Many of these countries are also attempting to hedge against China. These countries are primarily attempting to hedge against exceedingly increasing Chinese exports. India probably falls in the same category. However, regionalism offers a different opportunity to most of the countries. And regionalism, as we have seen it in the 80s or 90s, or regionalism as we see it even today, it is trade liberalization which emphasizes national interest. It is trade liberalization where every country negotiates hard, negotiates probably for a very long period until it gets the core of its national interest being protected under a proposed treaty. And that is how most of the regional trade arguments work. Most of the regional trade arguments have been created by tough negotiations, lengthy negotiations among their partners over how they regulate and how they liberalize trade within that particular group. RCEP is no exception. It is an organization, or it is a proposed group where the member countries, the 15 countries which today have signed the treaty, have negotiated very tough and have negotiated very hard in order to protect their interests. It may be wiser for India, therefore, not to sever the ties with the RCEP immediately and permanently. It may be a good decision to participate in the negotiations, to continue to negotiate, to continue to make harder terms, but hold your position until you get satisfaction. And therefore, it may make sense for India to accept the invitation of these 15 countries to participate and to become an observer, at least, in the RCEP in future. Thank you for watching, and please leave your comment in the comment box below.
Now be the first to know about the latest updates on our new news app. Go on your Android or iOS, search for HW News Network. Download our app, choose the language you prefer to get updates in, and be up to date with the latest news.
If you like this video, please share it, and we would love to hear your comments in the comments section down here. Also, please do like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter to get minute-to-minute news updates. For more such shows and videos, subscribe to our YouTube channel.